Long before it had a flag or a name, the North American continent was a vast, diverse landscape, stretching from dense northern forests to sweeping open plains. Contrary to European myths, it was far from an empty wilderness. Looking at a map of tribal territories from the era shows a continent humming with life. Hundreds of distinct indigenous groups, like the Cherokee, Navajo, and Iroquois, had thrived here for thousands of years, each operating with their own complex languages, cultures, and wisdom. These groups shared a deeply rooted philosophy regarding the earth they lived on. To them, the land was not a piece of property to be divided and owned. It was a living system to be cared for, stewarded, and kept in balance across generations. The story of the United States begins when this ancient system of stewardship collided directly with a restless, expanding Europe looking outward for new resources. By the late 1400s, European mapmakers and navigators were pushing their boundaries. In 1492, an explorer named Christopher Columbus sailed west from Spain, calculating he could reach Asia by going the opposite direction around the globe. His math was wrong, and his ships landed instead on islands off a continent entirely unknown to his backers. Because he firmly believed he had reached the outskirts of India, he labeled the local indigenous people he encountered as Indians, a geographical error that permanently attached itself to history. Word of this massive landmass traveled quickly back to Europe. Soon, French, Spanish, and English explorers were racing across the Atlantic, looking at the continent as an infinite, unclaimed vault of timber, gold, and fertile soil. The indigenous people who had lived there for millennia were given no choice in this influx. That transatlantic journey forced open a door, setting off a rush for territory that entirely stripped the native populations of their autonomy. England was determined to extract value from the continent. In 1607, a group of English colonists established a settlement called Jamestown in present-day Virginia. They were unprepared for the harsh climate and unfamiliar soil. Within the first year, starvation and disease wiped out more than half of the residents. The remaining colonists only survived those brutal conditions because local Native American tribes intervened. They taught the newcomers which native crops to plant and how to reliably source food in the difficult terrain. Yet, as the English recovered their strength, they repaid that assistance by expanding their footprint. They consistently pushed outward, seizing the very land that belonged to the people who had kept them from starving. Looking at this map of the eastern seaboard, you can see how that steady push compounded over the next century. Small outposts slowly grew into a contiguous strip of 13 distinct colonies, all governed from afar by the English crown. This century of expansion locked a brutal paradox into the foundation of the emerging society. Every new town, farm, and road built by the colonists required the direct displacement of native communities. Within those 13 colonies, daily life was forging a distinct mindset. Because the king was an ocean away, ordinary settlers had to build their own local governments, churches, and schools. They were developing a shared identity defined by self-reliance, wide economic opportunity, and religious freedom. At the exact same time they were celebrating these personal liberties, the colonial economy was engineering a system of extreme subjugation. Huge numbers of the workforce were enslaved Africans, brought over entirely by force to perform grueling labor without a trace of the freedom the colonists enjoyed. Meanwhile, the distant English government had drained its treasury fighting global wars. To replenish their funds, Parliament decided to extract more revenue from the colonies, placing mandatory taxes on everyday goods like paper, paint, and tea. The colonists were infuriated by the principle of the extraction rather than the raw cost. They had no elected representatives in the English Parliament making these decisions. They rallied around the phrase, "no taxation without representation," and in 1773, protesters boarded English ships in Boston and threw hundreds of chests of tea into the harbor. That act of defiance pushed their relationship with England past the point of repair. The colonists were now willing to die for the universal right to govern themselves, all while maintaining an economy built on denying those exact same rights to enslaved human beings. Looking at the original text of the Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson in 1776, you can see the sheer ambition of their demands. He wrote that all men are created equal, transforming a rebellion over taxes into a radical philosophical promise. Declaring independence was easy. Securing it was another matter entirely. The colonists had to form a makeshift, poorly supplied army to confront the British military, the most formidable fighting force on the planet. The survival of the revolution often hung by a thread. During the brutal winter of 1777 at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, soldiers huddled in the freezing snow without shoes or sufficient food. Thousands died of disease and exposure. But General George Washington lived among his men, keeping the fractured army from dissolving. Eventually, the colonial army received unexpected leverage. France, a longtime rival of England, dispatched soldiers, ships, and supplies across the Atlantic. That influx of resources shifted the momentum, allowing the Allied forces to trap and defeat the British Army at Yorktown in 1781. Against all logistical odds, the small collection of rural colonies had defeated an empire. The war was over, and the abstract ideals written on parchment now had to become the operating rules of a real physical nation. A military victory only creates a vacuum. Tearing down a monarch's authority is entirely different from the agonizing work of designing a functional system of laws from scratch. The famous calligraphy of "We the People" marks the result of the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. The architects of this document had a specific engineering problem to solve, creating a government strong enough to function, but restricted enough to prevent a dictator. To solve this, they created a mechanical separation of powers. The authority of the national government is divided into 3 equal nodes: the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Each branch is armed with tools to block, audit, and check the actions of the other 2. When it was time to activate this new government in 1789, George Washington was selected as the first president. He was elevated to the position not out of a desire for absolute power, but specifically because the public trusted him to wield authority carefully. He proved that trust was warranted when his terms concluded. Rather than ruling until death, Washington voluntarily packed up and returned to private life, establishing the crucial democratic precedent of relinquishing power peacefully. The United States is an idea built on an incredible tension. It possesses a brilliant, durable blueprint for self-governance, constructed directly on top of massive historical injustices. It operates as an ongoing experiment in human organization, one that every new generation must navigate, interpret, and refine.